In this video, we explore real horror stories in hotels, where guests stay looking for peace, but they are not the only ones in the rooms, and they witness the supernatural in hotels that seem quiet, but hide dark secrets.
The Forbidden Room.
I thought it was just a story to scare guests, until I felt that figure standing behind me inside the Forbidden Room. When I was 15, my parents decided to take a vacation at an old hotel, one of those places that seem stuck in another era. The place had a mysterious air, with long hallways and portraits of old faces hanging on the walls. The only thing that stood out was a room that had been closed for years. Nobody knew exactly why, but everyone seemed to avoid talking about the room at the end of the hallway. Of course, that made me feel a mix of fear and curiosity. One afternoon, while my parents rested, I decided to investigate. I approached the end of the hallway on the 3rd floor, where the room was. The door was secured with a padlock, but it looked so old that it didn't take much effort to break it with a stone I found in the garden. I pushed the door open, and it creaked as it swung. The first thing that hit me was a strong smell of dampness, as if the room had been shut for centuries. There were pieces of furniture covered in white sheets and dark mold stains on the walls. But what caught my eye the most was an old wardrobe, made of dark wood with an imposing design, placed near the bed. I didn't spend much time inside. The atmosphere was dense and suffocating, as if the air resisted being breathed. However, there was something there that made me think of going back constantly. Every night, after having dinner with my parents, I would sneak away and enter the room again. I did this for 3 days. I knew there was something strange about the room, but I kept coming back. The first night, I heard a whisper. It seemed to come from the wardrobe. It was like a faint voice repeating my name, but I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I ran out, trying to ignore it, but that voice followed me into my dreams. The next night, I went back in, determined to figure out if it was all just my imagination. When I opened the wardrobe, a draft came out of it, and I felt a dark shadow moving behind me. I turned around and saw it. A tall, slender, hunched figure with arms so long they almost reached the floor. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, it was gone. I ran out of the room with my heart racing, feeling like that thing had passed through me like a cold wind. The 3rd night, the last one, I woke up in the early hours with an urgent need to return to that room. It was as if something was dragging me there. Without thinking, I got out of bed, walked down the hallway, and pushed open the door. This time, the wardrobe was open, illuminated by the faint light coming through the window. As I approached it, I felt that cold sensation run down my spine again, and when I turned around, there it was, behind me, clearer than ever. It was almost 2 meters tall, and its face, if you could call it that, was like stretched pale skin, as if melted wax, with black spots all over. Its breathing was heavy and deep, as if each exhale carried centuries of pain. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't respond. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure approached slowly, its arms hanging down, and I could feel its cold breath filling the room. Suddenly, it lifted one of its arms toward me. It felt like ice piercing through my skin, and I thought I was about to faint. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't move, and I realized I was inside the wardrobe. I was trapped, and I could sense that the figure was still in the room. At that moment, I managed to regain control of my body, pushed open the wardrobe door forcefully, and ran. I ran like never before, down the stairs until I reached my parents' room. I woke them up screaming, unable to explain what I had seen. My parents didn't understand anything, but seeing me so distraught, they knew we couldn't stay another second in that hotel. At dawn, we packed our things, got into the car, and never went back to that hotel. It's been years, but since then, every so often, when I turn off the lights, I see that tall, hunched silhouette standing in the darkness, lurking, waiting.
The silent watcher.
They say old hotels keep many stories, but I never expected one of their protagonists to be standing next to my bed in the middle of the night. I stayed in an old hotel during a work trip. It had an ancient and majestic air, as if it held many stories to tell. The walls were made of stone, and the small windows didn't let in much natural light. My room was small, with worn-out furniture and a sense of dampness in the air. The first night was quiet, although the place gave me a strange feeling, as if I wasn't completely alone. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination. The next morning, I spent all my time working in the hotel's meeting room, but even though I was focused on my work, the feeling of not being alone stayed with me despite my efforts to ignore it. In the afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the nearby town, thinking that maybe if I distracted myself with new sights, I could shake off that sensation. But it didn't work. That night, something woke me up abruptly. When I looked toward a dark corner of my room, I saw it. A figure standing at the foot of my bed. I could barely make out its silhouette. It was dark and elongated, barely illuminated by the moonlight that slipped through the curtains. It seemed like a man, but there was something strange about its posture, something unnatural. It stood completely still, its arms limp by its sides. I was paralyzed, staring at that figure that silently watched me. Then, as if it had sensed my fear, it slowly turned and walked toward the darkest corner of the room, fading into the shadows. I jumped out of bed, turned on all the lights, and rushed to check every corner. There was nothing. No one. It was as if that figure had vanished into thin air. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept telling myself it was just a hallucination. The next day, although I was exhausted, I tried to focus on my work and avoid thinking about what had happened. The thought of returning to the hotel frightened me, but I had no other place to stay. So when night came, I went back, praying it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But it wasn't. The third night felt different. The room seemed even colder, and there was a musty smell that hadn't been there before. I sat on the bed for hours, too scared to turn off the light. I eventually fell asleep until a strange sound woke me up, like something dragging itself across the carpet. This time, I didn't need to adjust my eyes to see the figure. It was there, closer than before, standing right next to the bed. I could see its long, thin hands ending in claws. What was once a distant shadow had now become something tangible. Something I could clearly see. I couldn't stop staring. Terror had me trapped. And then, slowly, it leaned toward me. Its face was human, but grotesquely stretched. The skin on its face seemed too tight, as if it were about to tear, and its eyes, those eyes were the worst. They were a milky white, without pupils. Its mouth, which was closed at first, began to open slowly, revealing yellow, sharp teeth and a wide smile that seemed endless. I wanted to jump out of bed, but I couldn't move no matter how hard I tried. I could feel tears running down my cheeks from the fear. At that moment, the fear was so intense I could hardly breathe. I felt like I was suffocating. I swallowed hard and squeezed my eyes shut, as if ignoring it would make it disappear. When I opened them again, it was gone. I spent the rest of the night in the farthest corner of the room, with all the lights on and my back pressed against the wall. My eyes never left the bed, waiting for that thing to return at any moment. At dawn, I packed my things as quickly as I could and left the hotel. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just left. I never went back to that town. But even now, in my own house, when I try to sleep, I feel like something is slowly crawling toward my bed. And sometimes, just before falling asleep, I seem to see it standing in a corner of my room, as if that thing is still waiting for me in the dark.
Eternal worker.
I will never forget that night in the hotel when I woke up and saw the shadow of a man standing in my room, staring at me intently. A year ago, my sister and I decided to take a short trip to an old town to disconnect from everything. The town was picturesque, with stone houses and gable roofs. We stayed at an old hotel, not very big, and the rooms were singles. After checking in, my sister and I said goodbye, and I locked myself in my room to rest. At first, I thought everything was fine, but there was something in the atmosphere of that room that made me feel uneasy. The decoration, the dark and heavy furniture, and the dim light of the bedside lamp barely illuminating the corners contributed to creating a strange environment. I lay on the bed, trying to convince myself that it was just my nerves, but every sound, the creaking of the floor, the wind tapping against the windows, seemed threatening. The first clear sign that something was wrong was a faint whisper I heard at midnight. It was as if someone was speaking behind the closet door. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. It's just the wind, I thought. But the sound persisted, like a deep voice muttering unintelligible words. I slowly approached the closet and flung it open, only to find my things there, just as I had left them. I forced myself to believe it was my imagination, and went back to bed, though it took me a while to fall asleep. At some point in the night, I woke up with a strange feeling, as if someone was watching me. I slowly opened my eyes, and there he was, a man standing in the middle of the room. He was wearing a uniform with gold buttons, a hotel employee without a doubt. His face was pale, with sunken cheeks and grayish skin, and his eyes were completely black, like two empty orbs staring right at me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I stayed still, feeling how his presence filled the room with an overwhelming coldness. He didn't move. He just stared, as if he was waiting for something. After what felt like an eternity, I closed my eyes, hoping it was all just a nightmare. But when I opened them again, he was still there. I don't know how I managed to get up and run out of the room, but I did. I pounded on my sister's door, begging her to let me in. When she finally did, I told her what I had seen. She tried to calm me down, saying it must have been a dream, and even though I didn't quite believe it, I tried to convince myself. I slept in her room that night, and luckily, nothing else happened. The next morning, I went to the reception to change rooms. While talking to the receptionist, I noticed her expression turning uncomfortable when I told her my room number. With a forced smile, she assigned me a new room, and I thought it would all end there. But when I told my sister the story, she looked at me intently and then, in a low voice, confessed that she had also seen something the previous night. She told me that when she woke up to go to the bathroom in the early hours, she saw a figure in the hotel hallway, a man like the one I had described, wearing the old uniform with those dark, empty eyes. He was standing right in front of my door, motionless, as if guarding it. She thought of calling me, but when she tried to approach, the figure simply vanished, as if it had dissolved into thin air. We stayed in silence, trying to make sense of what we had seen. But the worst part was when, out of simple curiosity, we decided to ask more about the hotel's history. They told us that decades ago, one of the employees had died under suspicious circumstances. They found him in the service room of one of the suites. No one ever knew if it was an accident or something else, but ever since, some guests claimed to have seen his ghost wandering the hotel, watching, searching for something, or someone. We ran back to our rooms to pack our things as quickly as possible. I didn't want to spend another second in that hotel. Even so, while we were in the elevator and the doors were slowly closing, I could see, one last time, the silhouette of that man in uniform at the end of the hallway, motionless, staring directly at me. We left that very morning, and I didn't look back, but sometimes I feel that somehow he followed us. Even today, when I wake up in the darkness of my room, I feel those black eyes watching me from the corner, waiting for something from me. Thank you for journeying with us through the dark passages of these stories. If you enjoyed them, give us a like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more tales of terror. Until next time, where fear will once again be your companion.